tell that story of being outside the arena in your uniform, 4 minutes till game time to tip off, and you're waiting for your drug dealer.
You are listening to Heart of the Matter, a podcast where addiction meets recovery and families find hope.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Vargas, and you're listening to the first episode of a new podcast called Heart of the Matter, a production from Partnership to End Addiction. Heart of the Matter focuses on personal stories of substance abuse and recovery. So why stories? Well, stories are the way we relate to each other. Some of you might know I shared my own story in a book. I found out that I could help people relate to their own journeys and encourage them to share with others. Today, we'll hear from Chris Herren, former professional basketball player and one of the leading voices on substance abuse prevention and wellness in America. Chris's journey is captivating. From the outside, it looked like he had everything, but at the same time, he was struggling with severe substance abuse, the internal struggle, as he called it. His story, captured in the ESPN documentary Unguarded, compelled me to learn more about Chris and the struggles that he experienced. How did he find his way out of addiction and into the prominent position of advocating for kids? Currently, the way our nation is coping with the pandemic-related stress or emotions is troubling. A new report from the CDC found that 63% of young adults had symptoms of anxiety or depression, and a quarter had started or increased their use of substances, including alcohol, legal or illegal drugs. Chris shares more about the impact that stress can have on young people and his amazing narrative of recovery on Heart of the Matter today. Chris, nice to see you.
You as well.
I went back and I rewatched both of your documentaries, the documentary Unguarded and then the one on First Day. Mm-hmm. You've spoken to more than 1 million kids and athletes, and I was struck by everybody. You could hear a pin drop in that auditorium. I mean, people were on the edge of their seats. Kids were crying because they were so moved by what you said. Why do you think you relate so much to all these kids when you talk to them?
When I first started this, I went into auditoriums and gymnasiums and told my story. And after about 4 years, I felt that I wasn't enough. I felt that it was kind of the same old. I wanted to be more impactful. Every email that I received from children was about me and not about them. And given the responsibility to present in front of 2,000 high school age children, I wanted to be more responsible with my message. I wanted to have more impact. And, I did a exercise note to self for the CBS morning show, and it impacted me tremendously. To go back and talk to your younger self, that kind of lit a fire in me to change my message, to redirect it to the First Day. Over years, we've just seen such great impact on that messaging. I think it speaks to the kids. When it comes to drug addiction, we always talk about the worst day. We're always shouting at our children on how it's going to end rather than why it began. And we talk about the worst day and not the first day. So, it's been a journey for me, but to see the impact that this messaging has had over the years is tremendously rewarding.
I was struck by something you said. You said, I pretended to have all the confidence in the world in high school. I acted like everything was cool, and it wasn't. You had your first drink when you were a freshman. Mm-hmm. You started smoking pot again when you were a freshman. Why? I mean, you were a god in the halls of that high school. You were a basketball superstar even then. Why were you drinking? Why were you drugging?
I think there's multiple layers to this. It's not easy being 14 and for anyone, let alone being a 14-year-old living this life in the limelight. Mm-hmm. At that time, my parents were kind of 3.5 years away from getting divorced because of my dad's alcoholism. There was a lot going on, and it was my first escape. It was my first time out. I truly believe that I was wired to seek relief.
Did you have anxiety? Did you have insecurity? Did you have depression? I mean, what was it?
Who knows? I mean, people ask me if I'm depressed. Yeah, I mean, when you shoot heroin for 8 years, you take a chance at dying every day. That's quite, that's depressing to some extent. I don't know. I think probably fear as a child, not knowing what was going to happen next, not only in my life, but in my family's life. Growing up in an alcoholic house is not an easy childhood, and tough to manage.
But the point is that, from the outside looking in, you look like the kid who had everything. You were the basketball superstar all 4 years in high school. By the time you were a junior, you were winning all sorts of awards, national awards for your talent. You were being heavily recruited by the biggest and best colleges and college basketball programs in the country. And yet you say that you didn't have the confidence to walk into that party, as you say, to walk down those few steps to the basement to join your friends, unless you'd had a drink under your belt.
Yeah, I say to them I could play in front of 4,000 people, but I couldn't hang out with 14 of my best friends that I've known since childhood. I think there was just, to put it in perspective, I think as an adult, from a professional perspective, being observed and watched and critiqued. As a high school athlete at the level I was at, I was almost like auditioning it. People who, actors and actresses and models who walk in and they get that rejection. That's not easy to live with as an adult, never mind as a child. So every single day I walked into that practice, every single day I walked into that gym, I knew that I was being observed. I was being critiqued, and at 14, 15 years old, that's a heavy burden to carry.
By the time you went to college in your freshman year, it was already starting to spiral out of control. You ended up going to rehab for the first time that freshman year in college. How many people, obviously at that point, the whole world knew you had a problem, right?
Well, my freshman year was at Boston College, and there was a lot of excitement around me being there, being a local kid, and I was introduced to cocaine, and cocaine took me to a place that I had never been before. I say this all the time, and not many people can identify unless they've lived in that world, but cocaine gave me the freedom of expression. It allowed me to talk openly about some of my insecurities and what I was struggling with.
I hear that a lot from people in recovery, that they turned to that substance that they abused because they felt like they couldn't be themselves. They couldn't relax. I drank because of that. It was like the big exhale. I can finally deal.
Yeah, and that's what cocaine kind of became in my life. It became an opportunity to express myself in a way that I normally wouldn't, to open up and be transparent about how I felt about certain things that I would never talk about. So it became this crutch, right, at an 18-year-old kid. And after failing multiple drug tests at Boston College, they asked me to leave. And so I moved back home with my mom, and I woke up the next morning and I was on the front page of the papers as a drug addict, as an 18-year-old kid who was struggling with cocaine. And my future was over in a sense, before it even started.
I don't think people realize the impact that has. To be going through such a crisis like that and then have it in the newspapers.
And then not really anybody to talk to. I was 18 years old. My parents were going through a divorce.
Yeah.
Now I'm this 18-year-old kid who's well known as a drug addict. My next opportunity came in California, and I took it, and I did the geographical cure. I'm going to move 3,000 miles away to start fresh, and it was there waiting for me. And that's when I went. I walked into treatment at 21 years old for multiple failed drug tests at Fresno State University for, a major cocaine addiction.
For a lot of parents who are sending their kids off to college, I'm curious, how easy was it for you to get cocaine in college? You're at 18. How did you find the drug? How did you buy the drug? How easy was it?
I think once you know cocaine, you know where to find it.
What do you mean?
It's just the way people behave on it, how late the parties are going. It's probably in in that dorm room. Alcohol will eventually, knock you out and put you to sleep. Cocaine tends to keep you awake. So, once I understood, some of the side effects of cocaine, once I had done it myself and been around it, I knew where to find it. It wasn't hard. It wasn't only in my dorm room, that's for sure.
You were given that second chance at Fresno by that amazing coach. You did go to treatment. Why do you think treatment didn't work for you at that point?
Because I think there's a lot of treatment centers that it's kind of fear-based. It's going to tell you like what your life's going to look like. And that's tough to identify with. It's tough to identify as a 21-year-old saying, I'm going to, in 15 years, you're likely to be shooting heroin and overdosing multiple. At my wellness center, we talk about discovering your why. And nobody really asked me that. It was more kind of fear driven. But at 21
nobody asked you why you were doing coke?
I think it was more, why are you ruining this opportunity? I think there's multiple layers, and and mind you, this place was great. It's just, how much work can you do in 27 days?
Right.
Responsibly. We're not gonna dive into open a 21-year-old kid up and then throw him back to a college campus. So it was very surface level in many ways, and I wasn't really attracted to it either. I wasn't attracted to living life in recovery at that.
I think a lot of parents think, okay, I'm going to send my child to rehab, and after a month, it's going to be all fine. And I think nobody realizes that you don't get cured from this in 28 days, as you just said. It takes a lot of work after that and commitment.
Yeah. At my wellness center, if parents say, oh, I want to send, my son or daughter, I want to send my husband or wife. And if they say 30 days, I just tell them to go a different route. It takes time. You don't really meet the real person till like week 3. By week 3, we kind of settle in and feel that we can be transparent and honest and emotional. We can talk about some of the things the trust is built in the community. 28 days is basically detox.
Right. You came out of rehab. You went on to continue to have an extraordinary career in basketball. You were, picked in the NBA draft by the Denver Nuggets, pick number 33. It was a huge deal. After an injury, you went overseas and played. I guess one of the big questions people have hearing your story is, how on earth were you able to function at such an extraordinarily high level, to compete athletically at such a high level while doing drugs? Because you were sliding very quickly into OxyContin abuse. I mean, this was like serious abuse. I mean, tell that story of being outside the arena in your uniform, 4 minutes till game time to tip off, and you're waiting for your drug dealer.
I mean, that's what OxyContin, that's what it does to you. That's what opiates, unfortunately, they take over. They got a hold of me pretty quickly. I had never taken OxyContin. I'd never heard of OxyContin. And my first experience was a 40 milligram pill. And, I remember that 40 milligrams going to 1,600 milligrams.
In a day?
In a day. Yeah, in a day. So I was playing at a high level, but when the OxyContin I became so dependent upon OxyContin. That's when my career started sliding, right? The Celtics, here I am, big moment, big night. And I'm in early withdrawal. I can feel myself starting to get cold and weak, sweaty, all the early symptoms of withdrawal. And I'm going to play a pivotal role in this game. And I didn't have any, and I needed them. My body wasn't going to function without them. In order for me to play at that high level, I had to have them in my system, or there was no playing at all. So yeah, I made the phone call that I needed to make, and I met him outside. And for people who live in that world, it's a very normal behavior, right? I wouldn't blink if someone told that story to me, because I completely identified with the emotion, the feeling, the desperation behind that chase. But OxyContin is probably the toughest drug I've ever withdrawn from. I've done most drugs, and OxyContin was a drug that had a hold of me that I pray I never go back to.
The OxyContin addiction led you to heroin, as it does for so many people. They're all opioids. It's in that family. I'm sure you never dreamed, especially back when you tried that Coke that first day in that dorm room, your freshman year in college, or even when you were standing out on the corner outside the Boston Celtics arena in your Boston Celtics uniform, waiting for your drug dealer to bring you OxyContin. You never in a million years did you think you'd be in China or in Italy shooting up heroin, because you couldn't find any OxyContin. All you could find was heroin, and to keep from getting dope sick, you were desperate to do anything.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that transition was very natural and unnatural, right? It's wild to think of. But it's progressive. I remember taking OxyContin and looking at people who were doing heroin, like, what is wrong with these? And I remember the first time that I couldn't get my hands on it, and I chased. And, with the only option being heroin, I dove into it. And honestly, once I dove into heroin, I never went back to OxyContin. I didn't have the money for OxyContin. Heroin's expensive too. I don't want people to be misled. But OxyContin, I was spending $20,000 to $25,000 a month on. So the transition to heroin was dark. I remember those first few times like it was yesterday. Even to this day, if I get a vitamin infusion, I look away. I'm not a big fan of needles. So to think that, for about 7 years, multiple times a day, I was giving myself shots. So, that transition for me was very difficult, but it was inevitable, honestly. My OxyContin addiction was so deep that the transition to heroin was inevitable.
When you look back on that, I mean, that is and that, again, going back to your focus on the first day, there are a lot of parents out there who might say, yeah, my kid drinks, or I think he smokes pot every once in a while, but everybody drinks, and, kids smoke pot. What are you going to do? It's not going to lead to Coke, to OxyContin, to heroin.
Right.
What do you say to that?
Well, I think every parent, just talk to a parent who has a child struggling with substance use disorder. They would love to hit rehab. They would love to change the narrative, how they talked about this 10 years prior.
Hi there, Heart of the Matter listeners. My name is Rachel Vitale, and I am one of the helpline specialists at Partnership to End Addiction. If your child is struggling with substance use or addiction and you don't know what to do, there is help. Partnership to End Addiction's helpline connects you with a helpline specialist like me for one-on-one support. You don't have to go through this alone. You can connect with us by sending a text message to 55753 or visiting our website, drugfree.org, to connect with a helpline specialist today.
The scariest thing about it for me now, in the position I'm in, is seeing young adults come in suffering from marijuana psychosis. I have a 21-year-old and 18-year-old, and it frightens me to see these young adults who are away at college come into my wellness center in the middle of a psychosis presenting as schizophrenic. So today's marijuana is much different.
Explain that. Explain to our listeners who might not know what marijuana psychosis is. What is it?
It's what I don't know the chemistry behind it. I just know that it triggers a psychosis in their brain. I think it often happens to people who are predisposed to depression or anxiety disorder. But to just watch a young child who, went away to school thinking, I'm going to smoke a little weed, and their whole world is turned upside down. The internal struggle in their brain, watching them trying to kind of rationalize where they were at and land, is frightening as a parent.
Do they have a bad reaction to the marijuana? Is it there is some substance in the marijuana? And by the way, we now know that marijuana is coming laced with all sorts of stuff that's really dangerous.
I just think the levels of THC, I think it's much higher. I think the dab pens and the edibles, kids don't really know how to manage that. And none of them prepare for it. None of them foresee themselves, in their third year at college, driving 150 miles an hour down a highway thinking they're being chased, and they're being chased by no one. very, very difficult to see as a parent. But, you know, to parents out there who say all kids do it, that's a cop-out. You know, not all kids do it. And that being said, you know, I think we've surrendered. I think we've given up on that messaging. Our kids' brains need to develop. I think they need to find an identity on their own and some security. So to think that, you know, it's totally normal for 15-year-olds to get drunk in a basement while parents are sitting upstairs drinking wine, I find that extremely troubling.
How did you, I mean, you were drug tested as part of you being on your college basketball teams. So people found out you were doing drugs that way. A lot of kids aren't on teams and aren't drug tested because of that. And secrecy is a hallmark of the disease of addiction. How did you keep your drug use a secret for as long as you did?
I was kind of, to be honest, I was out pretty early. You know, I mean, at 18, the Boston Globe kind of exposed me of my secret.
But I mean, later on when you were shooting up heroin several times a day, how did your wife not know? How did, you know, your brother, your mother, how did they not know?
Because like that's your whole world revolves around that, is to hide, is to create chaos over here so they won't watch me here. You know, I often felt bad for the people who loved me because, you know, all day long I was thinking about how I can manage my drug addiction but keep it a secret from them. You know, and they weren't spending that much time trying to figure it out. So, you know, I remember just making my wife sick, second guessing herself, not trusting in her instincts, you know, making her feel that she was inadequate of identifying this, you know, this illness that I was suffering from.
Or crazy from thinking something's wrong and then you're saying nothing's wrong, and
Sure.
She's constantly doubting herself and not trusting her instincts, right?
And which causes an unbelievably toxic environment. And, you know, I remember her walking away from some argument saying like, you know, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And she wasn't. So, you know, that's, you know, it's very important for people suffering from this addiction to keep it a secret. And I tried really hard for multiple reasons. I didn't want to be exposed. I didn't want to show that I was so deep into this. And I didn't want to let people down that loved me. You know, it wasn't all deceit, you know, there was good intentions in that too.
I think that's one of the things that people who haven't actually suffered from this disease ask to those of us who have, which is, why couldn't you just stop? Like, why wouldn't you stop for me? Why wouldn't you stop for yourself? What's your answer to that?
I was untreated, you know, I hadn't done the work. There were things that I needed to talk about that were buried. I had to find the community to identify with, you know, people that understood me, people that wouldn't judge me. And, you know, I found that in this recovery community that I live in today, and to be 12 years sober, you know, it's not easy. You know, there's days I want to drink. There's days I drive. I'm driving my car home from work and I'm like, wow, like a nice little nip, you know, could do the trick. There's days I need relief. I just get relief in different areas today.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think a lot of people don't understand. You're not cured all of a sudden and it goes away.
Yeah.
I mean, sobriety is something you work on every day of your life.
Absolutely. And it ebbs and flows, right? There's been times, year 7, my recovery was much stronger than year 9. You know, it was much smoother at times. But that also, you know, depends on how much work I'm doing and how connected I am. And I'm fortunate to live in this, whether it's speaking to children, my foundation, or Herren Wellness. You know, and I'm here now. It's just, I'm always around it. I just have to be very aware not to get lost in others and continue to seek and find myself.
One of the things that this new CDC report points out is that this age group, 18 to 24, is the least capable to deal with uncertainty in life. The not knowing what's going to happen, the fear about, am I safe? And you and I are both parents. The number one thing we're supposed to do as parents is to make our children feel safe, to put up those guardrails, to put up those boundaries, to set those rules. And you are allowed to do this and not allowed to do that. And even though they might argue about it, it makes a child feel safe.
Mm.
And a lot of the world right now is set up so that we all feel tremendously unsafe and uncertain and anxious and worried. And this age group is particularly incapable of dealing with that uncertainty. And according to all sorts of government statistics, more and more of these young adults, these kids, are turning to alcohol and drugs.
It's I see it every day. I think structure and routine is so important for young adults.
Hard to do right now.
Yeah, and it's important for everyone. I've been really fortunate from my perspective that my routine hasn't kind of broken because I'm here every day. I have the luxury to be part of the process of people who are healing. But everybody who walks through the door in the last 4 months, COVID got the best of them. And it's interesting, I'm now getting a lot of phone calls from people who are in long-term sobriety, now who are relapsing. The first phone call this morning was from someone who had 8 years, were looking to come in because they just really struggled with the lack of structure and routine and access. The Zoom meetings have been great. I think what they've done is they've introduced people to another platform to support recovery. But I know for me personally, I need that connection. I need to be out and about and sitting with people. And I'm fortunate to have that here.
One of the tenets of recovery are meetings, getting together with other people who are like you, who have your same stories. And by hearing their stories, you feel less shame and guilt about your own stories and feel safer and supported and that interconnected support. And now everything is happening, over Zoom meetings. Kids are turning now, they're not seeing their friends. They can't go out with their friends. So they're on their screens a lot more, which a lot of screen use and social media can contribute and heighten and ramp up that anxiety that these kids are feeling. It's sort of a toxic brew of circumstances in this time of uncertainty, in this time of fear, in this time of anxiety, that they're then turning to behaviors that we know statistically, scientifically contribute to anxiety.
And sadly, if you watch TV, it's every other commercial is about a treatment center. And I've talked to multiple different companies about being more empowering. Like, let's offer services like around wellness, how to go through this process. What can we do to support people struggling? Let's just not offer treatment at the end of it. Let's find ways not to get to treatment.
I was struck by something your wife, Heather, said in the documentary Unguarded. She said, quote, Chris was able to give his children what he was never given. What was that?
A sober dad. My dad, God bless him, he's 68 years old. He lives probably, I'd say, 12 miles from here, from my wellness center, and he's never seen it. He's never been here, has no, I guess, desire to see what his son has built. And it's tragic. My dad will more than likely drink himself to death. His death, unfortunately, will probably be alone in his apartment, surrounded by beer cans. I've offered to help him. We've facilitated treatment centers for the last 7 years. But loneliness is a big factor. I have this great 70-year-old man here right now, who has plenty of money, plenty of access, adult family, adult children. And he said, Chris, loneliness gets me every time. My alcoholism and loneliness gets me every time. So my dad's, he's lonely. And the fact that my children can see their father walk through life one day at a time and live this is pretty special.
So what do you recommend as a parent? I know that as a parent, I talk to my kids about stuff my parents never talked to me about. I'm looking for things that my parents probably wouldn't have looked for because I was so anxious as a kid. Tell me how and what advice would you give to our parents about what to look for, what to ask your kids, what to say to them? Because again, you on the surface looked like you had it all.
Right.
And you were suffering.
So my mom, she died when she was 51. She died from cancer. And I was sitting by her deathbed, and she apologized to me. You know, she said, I'm so sorry for not intervening earlier. And those are the tough questions, you know, like what's wrong? And are you okay? And, you know, how's your self-esteem? You know, where's your self-worth? You know, I see people in here all the time, like, what's your battery level? You know, like, where are you at? Are you red? Are you orange? Are you 10%, 20%? Like, what do we need to work on? And, you know, those, just why, you know, often, you know, like kids come home drunk and it's like, who are you with? Where'd you go? Who bought it? What happened? Not why. Like, why in the world wouldn't you ask your daughter why she had to get that way?
Right.
You know, nobody asks like the soul, the internal question. It's like who, it's like we're pointing the finger at everybody else. But nobody asks why. And I think kids identify with the first day because of why, because how I asked them why.
Why did you feel like you had to get drunk? Why did you feel like you needed to drink in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, parents, like we challenge our children so often in so many other areas of life, whether it's the arts, athletics, education, but why don't we challenge them to be better socially and like better emotionally? Like, we don't do that. It's like, I'll hover over your homework, I'll go to your sporting events, but on Friday night, mommy's going to drink her wine and you're going to go out with your friend. And that's not easy.
What are the warning signs that, you know, because I go back to that story you told about Heather, where she was constantly doubting herself, where you would say, I'm fine, I've got it under control, and you were lying. Right. And she would then think, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. I guess my instincts were wrong. So with a parent struggling with, I've got a straight A student who's captain, you know, of the basketball team. You know, yes, he came home drunk the other night, or sometimes he looks a little out of it, but he's, you know, everybody else says he's doing great. So what advice do you give to parents on trusting that little voice and that intuition, and how they can bring that up with their kids and have success in getting them to open up?
Well, I mean, honestly, I have multiple kids just like that right now here, you know, that their parents didn't trust their gut, didn't believe in the instinct that they were feeling as a mom or a dad, or also just wanted to kind of wait it out. You know, a lot of parents kind of want to wait it out. Like, okay, like there'll be a shift, kind of going through this phase, and we'll see them at the other end of it. And some kids never get out of it. You know, so it is about trusting your instincts. But it also is, you know, I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of childhood friends that their parents would give anything to do it, to not support our drinking, to look away, to ignore it.
To dismiss it as a teenage thing.
Yeah. Why is it a teenage thing? Why is getting drunk in a basement a teenage thing? I need to know why. I just don't get it. Why? Because teenagers can't do what they want to do unless they're under the influence of alcohol. They can't behave or dance the way they want to dance unless, like, you don't find that sad as a mom that my daughter can't dance unless she's drunk. She can't smile and jump around and have fun unless she's drunk. I'm waiting for the person to answer the question, why is it a teenage thing?
Finally, Chris, it took you a long time to finally turn it around. What happened? Like, what was that turning point? Can you put your finger on, did you have that quote moment of clarity? What happened that you finally were able to say, I got to stop and I've got to stay stopped?
I was so exhausted, but I remember that one time when I looked at myself in the mirror and all the truth came out. I wasn't that guy anymore. You know, the reality was in front of me. I have no money, no job, no health insurance. Whatever my family has, I've taken, and I'm looking to take whatever's left. But yet behind me, I have a beautiful wife and 2 beautiful children. And I remember being in treatment and thinking, I probably lost my wife, but I still have an opportunity to be a dad. You know, Christopher was 9 and Samantha was 7. And Drew, my youngest, my wife had just given birth. And I said, Drew can be that child that he doesn't know me the way Christopher and Sam know me. He won't see what they've seen. And that's come true. You know, Drew's a different kid because he grew up in a different house. And Christopher and Samantha often have to remind him, you know, that life wasn't always like this. You know, we had some tough times as a family because Drew knows nothing but recovery in a sober house. So I think what was different is I was willing to, no matter what, do what it takes to stay sober. Sobriety is not perfect. My recovery has not been perfect, but it's given me and my family something that we'll cherish forever.
I was struck by something you said, which was that you didn't think that basketball was your destiny, which, would surprise everybody, I think, who had ever seen you play, because you looked like a player destined for superstardom for many, many, many years. But clearly you found your destiny.
I hope so. But there was always a part of me that knew I was going to fail.
Really? Why?
Because I wasn't well. I wasn't prepared for the long game. That's why I never dreamt of it. I wasn't like this kid growing up who I can't wait to play for the Celtics. It was just like, I can't wait to play high school basketball. And then I was like, wow, I'm good enough to go to college. And I went to college. And then 3 years into college, they say, there's a chance you might go to the NBA. It was never on the top of my list because I was afraid to lose it probably. And I knew what this internal battle was going on that nobody else was seeing. So for another show. Chris
Herren, thank you so much for talking with us today.
So good to see you.
Yeah, you've got some important advice, I think, for parents and for kids going through this. And thank you for your amazing work. Your documentary, The First Day, which is must-see, I think, for every kid and every parent out there, as well as Unguarded, which is an incredible story of your life, too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Chris Herren today. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our website at drugfree.org/podcast. If you want to learn more about Chris Herren and his work, visit herrenproject.org. As a reminder, if you need help with a loved one who is struggling with substance abuse, you can text 55753 or visit drugfree.org. Talk to you soon.